One of the common questions that new shooters have is, how do you do load development? How do you create a load, choose a powder, choose the powder charge, the overall length of your bullet loaded to get the best performance out of your rifle? There's many techniques out there. I can just describe how I've done it, a way that works for me, that gets me an accurate load fairly quickly. And the caveat to this is sometimes the load that you develop works at one location in your rifle and doesn't work in another location. So for example, I could make a load. I live in Washington State, where it's fairly cool and humidity around 50–60%. I can take that exact same load and come to Phoenix, Arizona and shoot in 95-degree heat with 10% humidity, and it may perform completely differently in those conditions. So your load that you develop may not work all the time in your rifle. You'll learn that by experience. But basically the best way to start is just open a reloading manual. Vitavori Powders has a reloading manual on their website. Every powder manufacturer has some sort of loading data available, as well as just general reloading manuals. Berger has a reloading manual, for example. So look in those reloading sort of reference materials and pick which kind of powder. You'll find a range of powders which suit your cartridge. You want to think about, what is your end goal? What's your end state? What's the application for my ammunition? So are you shooting your rifle at extreme long range? Is this a hunting application? Is this a short range accuracy application? And you want to probably find a couple of projectiles that will meet your needs within that caliber cartridge. Once you have that, and once you've kind of looked at which might be some candidate powders, there's some very, very basic techniques you can use. Look in the reloading manuals, find starting loads. They've done some of this data experimentally to say, okay, we think that the beginning load should be, say if I'm loading for 223 Remington and I'm using a powder like Vitavori N140 with a 77 grain Berger bullet. So I might look in the reloading manual and it says, start around 22 grains of powder and don't put in more than, we think the max load is around 23 or 23.5 grains of powder, just for example. Those might not be actual numbers, just so you know. And you'll start at that low powder number and slowly increase the charge weight and do a test. This is known as a ladder type test, and there's different, some people call it different names, named after different people or different processes, but it's called a ladder test because you're essentially creating a ladder. You're going up one run of velocity and powder charge at a time, and you're analyzing the performance of your ammunition at each one of those stages. It is vital that if you can, use a chronograph in conjunction with this load development process. A chronograph is going to tell you the velocity of the ammunition, and it's also going to tell you the extreme spread of your slowest to your fastest round. And what you're looking for is, during this testing process, I personally use increments of about 0.3 grains. And I'll go up, I'll take a load and I'll increase it by about 0.3 grains, and I'll shoot 5 shot groups. In between these groups, you might want to let your rifle cool down. You don't want to get the rifle so by the end of your test, it's really hot, the barrel's hot, the chamber's hot, because you might not be getting accurate feedback if you're using this ammunition in an application like hunting where you haven't been shooting all day. The ammunition could perform completely differently out of a sort of cold, unfired rifle and versus a rifle that's been fired a lot and is all hot. So you do this sort of ladder test to where you get your velocity in the range that you want and with the performance that you want. All the time that you're doing this test, you want to check every time that you fire for sort of signs of pressure. As we go up in the powder charge weight, you are increasing pressure. The more powder that's in a case, the more gas and pressure that is caused by that powder being burned in that closed system. So some standard pressure signs are the bolt is slightly hard to lift. Looking at the rear of the case head, you may see some marks on that cartridge case. Marks from the ejector, marks from the extractor, kind of a smearing or shiny spots on the case. Also look at the primer, physically inspect the primer. If the primer is what they call cratered, where it looks like instead of an even sort of indentation where the primer, the firing pin struck the primer, you actually looks like a crater from the moon, where it looks like there's a rim around or an edge around that indentation where the firing pin struck the primer. Those are all signs of pressure. And that means that you've put too much powder in, you need to back it back down. There is an effort by almost all reloaders to try to get the fastest ammunition they can. In my many, many years of experience in competing at the highest level and coaching shooters at the highest level at national and international level competitions, fast ammunition doesn't always mean the best performance. You want to get the best, most accurate ammunition you can load at safe pressures. That's going to give you the best, most consistent performances, whether you're out hunting, trying to you finally got that hunt you've been waiting years for, or shooting with your friends at targets, or shooting in recognized competitions, PRS, NRA, CMP, things like that. Safe, accurate ammunition will always beat ammunition that is on the top razor's edge of pressure and velocity. Because at some point, due to the condition of the if it's really hot out or some other thing that changed and you didn't realize it, all of a sudden you could have problems in a competition or on a hunt, and that will ruin everything for you. So I'll do that basic ladder test, and once I have my velocity done to where I'm where I want to be, and it's performing extreme spread and standard deviation wise where I want it to be, then I can start looking at the seating depth of the bullet. It's important before you begin this sort of ladder test process of choosing a powder type and choosing a powder weight that bullet is not contacting the riflings at all. So I believe if you go to ishootbetter.com, which is Burger Bullets has a blog where it describes a lot of these processes in much more detail and depth than I am right now. I believe they recommend starting with the bullet about 15 thousandths from the riflings. And that's a fine number to start at. Once you've got your powder charge set, then you can start adjusting your seating depth. Some bullets perform better seating relatively close to the riflings. Some perform better seating very far back from the riflings. Me personally, I change my seat depth by about 15 thousandths increments, seating it deeper and deeper and deeper in the case from that 15 thousandths off the riflings, and I'm just looking at group size. Primarily, I'm looking at the up and down or the vertical spread of the group. Same process as when I'm choosing powder. If I don't have a chronograph, you can still do this ladder test effectively, but you're just looking at the shape of these groups on the target. And you'll see across a range of powder weights, the vertical will slowly get smaller, and it might actually, for a few successive powder weights, be the same size group. Then you'll see it change again and get larger. So you want to pick your powder charge somewhere in that area where you have across the board of like maybe even up to half a grain of powder weight where you have good verticals. That's, some people call that a node, N-O-D-E, a node of powder weight. So once you've got your powder weight and your seat depth sorted out, you're ready to go. If you have the accessibility to do this seating depth test at a longer range where those vertical spreads really show up, that's very, very helpful. Personally, if I can, I actually do some of those testings at 600 yards. And that's in a very stabilized platform to where those difference in verticals really show up. Between like in an F-class environment, I'm actually looking for 2 to 3 inches maximum of vertical at 600 yards. And if all of a sudden something pops up and it's 5 inches of vertical, that's very, very evident that that combination doesn't work. So have a very stable platform. And then something that people don't really think about is the aiming mark. People tend to shoot smaller groups based on the aiming mark that they want to look at. This is kind of like an inside baseball shooter thing. Some people, you might find with experimentation, you shoot smaller groups aiming at an X, aiming at a diamond, aiming at a square, aiming at a circle, and test some of these different combinations, the size of it. And it depends what kind of reticle you have in your scope. You could not be getting valid actual results because you're making a shooting error and don't even realize it. So that part, the actual shooting part, then applying the fundamentals during this load development process is extremely important. Extremely important. So make sure the rifle kind of cools down in between groups. Make sure that you're shooting to your best ability, applying all your fundamentals of marksmanship, and have a plan before you go out there.